Welcome back, hockey fans, to another edition of This Week in Wisconsin Prep Hockey. With me tonight, Bill Jr. from just down the road, Del Scanlon from down in Reedsburg, and our special guest tonight is the voice of the state tournament, Bob Bradovich, coming to us from Eau Claire area.
That's correct. Yep, on the north side.
Well, welcome, Bob. We're excited to hear all about.
Well, thanks for having me, and this is not anything other than just thank you for you guys for what you do for prep hockey in the state of Wisconsin. You're a resource, for those of us who are in the business of broadcasting games when it comes to stats and things like that, and I'm sure the coaches appreciate not just the not just the extra exposure, but the fact that they don't have to take 5 calls per week to get updated stats and things like that. So hey, looking forward to sectionals this coming week.
Yeah, the fans just yell at us, and then we yell at the coach and say, hey, where's our stats? And then we go ahead and enter it.
Imagine fans yelling about
if necessary.
This. Yeah.
Goalie parents are the worst.
Yeah.
That shouldn't have been 45 saves. He stopped 70 shots. No, he did not. We're going to start on kind of a somber note here, Bob. You're in the Eau Claire area, obviously. The tragic passing of Brooke Kelly was in the news over the last couple weeks there in Eau Claire, and everybody's sort of banded together around that. Obviously, her brother, Joe Kelly, is a senior, I believe, on Eau Claire Memorial this year.
Yep.
What's that been like down there, seeing just that outpouring of support?
Well, I mean, it's you get both sides of it. You get it's just a gut punch to not just the memorial program, but the family. And, Joe and his sister Brooke were they were the only kids of the Kelly parents. And, the realization that I'm sure is hitting those folks that, okay, Joe was more than likely going to go off and play junior someplace next year. But they still had one daughter to kind of come through, Memorial High School. And to that realization that, and I know with other parents, and I'm sure with you guys too, where, being an empty nester after you've had, kids for 18 some years, all of a sudden sometimes that can be a difficult transition. And again, it's just, you think of the parents first and the Kelly family more than anything else, but the fact that it hits, everybody on the memorial program so hard, because all those guys are pretty tight. They go to school together. They came through the ranks. And even these last 2 North Memorial games, and, I've been covering North Memorial games since I got to Eau Claire in September of '96, but I've never seen games like that where, it was very competitive, but then afterwards, both teams are, greeting each other at center ice, and everybody's hugging everybody. And, like it is in a lot of places around the state. I mean, these kids come through the youth ranks starting in mites and all the way up to bantams, and then they split, north side and south side once they get to the JV program. So it's and then, for example, you've got Joe Kelly is one of 3 captains for the Old Abes. His best friend is Sam Thorpe, who's one of the captains at North, and the dads were buddies and still are, because they play together at North. So it just hits a lot of people a lot of different ways. But I guess if there's something gratifying about it is, I happened to go to the Celebration of Life this past Monday, but just to see the outpouring of support just from the community at large, not just the Eau Claire community, but the Chippewa community, the other schools in the Big Rivers Conference. Everybody has stepped up, and the flowers and all that sort of thing that folks have, sent to the Kelly family in this time of grief and all that. So, and seeing other teams like the UW Eau Claire men's team put stickers on the back of their helmet to remember Brooke Kelly. So it's good to see that. I mean, and we all know that, and you guys know it probably better than I do, just how tight the hockey community is. and the fact that you're seeing other schools and other programs, kind of stepping up in that is uplifting. But it's so difficult, and it's just, to me, it's just unimaginable what those folks are going through. So I guess to sum up, you get a little of both. On one hand, it's sort of like gratifying to see all the support that the Kelly family is getting. On the other hand, it's just like, what an awful thing for that family have to go through at this time. And not just the parents, but you're looking at two sets of grandparents as well.
Yeah, that was, we found out the day after we named Joe Kelly our Player of the Week that his sister had died the previous Friday,
Right.
and I'm like, well, crap.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. The news had been out there by then. The
Right.
Eau Claire Police Department had released it out,
Yeah.
but like we weren't aware of that, and yeah, that was that hit me really hard that Monday when I found out after the
Right.
Player of the Week announcement.
Yeah, and I heard about it through the grapevine because my Susan has been a power skating instructor in town for a while, and worked with Joe and worked with Sam Thorpe and a lot of the North kids and a lot of the Memorial kids. And yeah, it's just one of those things. It just hits everybody. And I never knew Joe. I mean, I had basically taken my year out of it, but he was on the varsity as a freshman, and you could tell that he was going to be a good player. I don't think I'd ever interviewed him those first couple of years when I was still doing, the 6 and 10 on TV. And, because they had other players, upperclassmen, which are typically the players that you talk to, the captains and that sort of thing. But then doing the radio now for the last 2 years, I mean, he's of a trio of forwards that are awfully good players at Memorial. He's the one that really stands out. He's the kind of the one that makes it go. And I didn't know until I got to the celebration of life that, until I saw the trucks from his dad's business to say, oh boy, it's that Kelly family. And it's a place where I purchased a water heater 5 years ago to replace the one that broke in our house. So it's just, again, it's tough, and it's really tough for these people. And knowing people who've gone through things like this in the past, one of the things they always say is that, when it happens, you're still kind of in shock, and, the outpouring of support is really nice. But eventually that goes away and everybody goes back to their lives. And now all of a sudden, as you're going through the stages of grieving, and that support's not right there. So hopefully, and I've, in talking with some of the administrators, like the athletic director at Memorial, it sounds like they've done everything they could. The district has to provide support, counseling, all that sort of thing for the kids there, because this is a tough thing. I mean, this is a tough deal, and it's not. When talking to Mike Collins, the Memorial head coach, in his first year with the program, but his hockey career goes back to his days growing up in Canada. And he's the first one to say, this isn't in any coaching manual. There's no real procedure to follow after something like this. So they're just trying to support Joe and the guys in the team and everything the best they can. And I can say this, getting back to hockey, and it seems almost kind of trivial given what we've talked about, but that team is playing as well as I've seen them play all year. They found that extra gear. They found that extra level. How far can that carry them? And it remains to be seen. Obviously, they got to go to Hudson on Tuesday night, so we'll see how that turns out. But at least these last few games, they've, at least from where I sit as a somewhat neutral bystander that happens to be talking into a microphone, that they're playing their best hockey right now. And like I said, that first line especially is just absolutely flying, and it's that part's fun to watch. So hopefully, those games and those few hours give everybody a respite from the really difficult stuff that the folks are dealing with.
Yeah, and I noticed that Joe kept playing. I don't think he took any games off
Nope.
afterward. You got to get back out there. You got to do something. Because if you just sit at home, you'll go crazy.
Exactly. And, the game, excuse me, guys, Jackson the dog. I had the audacity to go to a squirt A hockey tournament today, so Jackson's being a little. I'll threaten to send him to Coach Labuta's house over in Menominee, where he can get on the bench with the rest of the football dogs and do that. But no, he got back in action that shortly after. I think it was the Tuesday after the accident happened, and got a goal and an assist when they were playing. I'm not sure where they're playing off the top of my head. I can look at my notes, and then the 2 games against North, and again, when he was on the ice, he was, at least again from my perspective, the best player on the ice. And again, and I've talked to various coaches who've dealt with things like that, and they say that when they go to the gym or they go to the rink or the football field, whatever it is that kind of that respite. It gives them that time away from the grief and lets them, just have a couple hours away from it. And I know in this last North Memorial game, there's Joe Kelly's dads standing with the rest of the Memorial dads where they usually stand in the parent section. So maybe the game is something that helps heal some really difficult things and some, a lot of sadness and just that emptiness that those folks have to be feeling.
All right, and then moving back to hockey, you're all up in it in Section 1, which in D1 Section 1 is the most brutal sectional on the boys' side of the 8 boys sections, D1 or D2. Eau Claire Memorial, you said traveling to Hudson. How do you like their chances? They've already played them twice.
Right. I called the game that was 6-0 in favor of Hudson at the very beginning of the year. And Hudson, I believe at that time, it had 4 games under its belt, Memorial just 2. And then not necessarily a new coaching staff, because the assistants for the most part are the same. Former Regis Co-op head coach Guy Brown is now on that staff, along with Jeff Schemberger and Andrew McCabe, and then with Mike Collins. So, but again, those other guys have been in the community for a long time, so everybody knows everybody, and they're all hockey people. But just a few little tweaks from what Chris Stock was doing, which was a little different from what Mike Schwengler was doing. But in that game, Hudson's passes were tape to tape, and shots were finding upper corners of the net, and Memorial's passes were missing by about that much, and the shots were missing by about that much. So even though it was 6-0, just from where I sat, I just thought, Memorial just needs, they need to get some things together. And you guys have seen this with Davis Trubisky. Hudson gets a lead on you, you got a really big mountain to climb, because they tend to come out, throw the kitchen sink at you right away in that first period. They get a couple goals, all of a sudden they're sagging back. They don't make a lot of mistakes. They're very well coached, and
once they get a lead there, they act like they're coached by an NHL defenseman.
Well, yeah, and why would they listen to a guy that won a state title at Hudson and was the state player of the year, was on the 06 National Championship Badgers team, and oh, by the way, he had, he's got his name in the Stanley Cup, and then you bring in, Dean Talifas, who worked with that staff, in the prior years and developed the off-ice program. Yeah, they know what they're doing. There's no coincidence that they're successful, given what they have there. That being said, the rematch was at Hobbs, but of course, because of COVID and various county restrictions, it was actually on a night where, and I don't know exactly how they made the decision, that the Memorial Hudson game was in the Akrovik rink and North Menominee was in the O'Brien rink, the main rink, where the Blue Golds play. And yeah, I'm not sure how exactly that decision got made. And the reason that, iHeartMedia Eau Claire made the decision, with me basically giving the input, was the logistics. There's a place you can plug in for your Ethernet so your live unit works. You didn't really have that in the Akrovik rink, and you can't run off a mobile hotspot because you're in a pole shed, in essence. So, what are you going to do? So, but apparently in that game, Hudson, got ahead. Memorial came back. Hudson went up 5-2, but Memorial closed it with a couple late goals. It was 5-4. Pulled the goalie, couldn't quite finish the deal. So I think coming out of that game, Memorial felt pretty good about itself and realized, if we can clean up a few mistakes, we're right there with them. So all that being said, I think it's going to be a really good game. You give an edge to Hudson only because they're playing at home, and they play very well at home, even without, as you guys know, the crowds aren't exactly what they would normally be for a sectional game. But I would expect a close one. And like I said, give Hudson a little edge, but it would not surprise me one bit if Memorial wound up winning that one.
And then on the other side, Spash and Chippewa Falls. Chippewa Falls got All-State goalie Bridger Fixmer back for a 10-save tune-up against Wisconsin Rapids. Now he gets to face Spash, who's a much stronger team than Wisconsin Rapids.
And you guys will have to help me out on Spash because, since I've been so immersed in Big Rivers hockey and then, doing some Big Rivers basketball and the occasional Clover Belt basketball, I maybe catch a score here or there. And I definitely would concur with you that, Spash, the higher seeded team, has played a tougher schedule, is better. Chippewa, though, that's a solid team. That's a really good team that Scott Parker has. And, he's forgotten more hockey than most people know or will ever know. And as a veteran coach, he's got just such a good touch with that team. He really knows his guys well. He's got a calming presence about him because he's seen just about everything. He's played the game at a high level. His brother played the game in the NHL, for God's sake. But he knows when to get his guys refocused, and he knows how to get on them. So, again, I had nothing against Spash. I know they're a good club and obviously a good tradition, drawing from a big, student body. But there's just something about that Chippewa team, and I'm glad you pointed that out, Bill, because with Vixmer is that he's one of those goalies that can be a game changer. That, they're the kind of team that can survive a period when things aren't going their way and there's defensive breakdowns because he's the kind of goalie that can steal a game. And I think we saw in the sectional final when it was Hudson and Chippewa for the right to go to state. And I think most everybody was looking at, hey, this is going to be Hudson's year. And they couldn't score on Fixmer. And all of a sudden, Fournette and Lindstrom got going. And that thing was over after about a period and a half. So,
yeah. And then, Fixmer and Caden Grant played an all-time game down in Madison.
Right. Exactly. And it's just one of those things where, like I said, and I haven't had the chance to see Chippewa. Actually, check that. I saw Chippewa and Memorial at Hobbs, and Memorial beat them. But Chippewa's good, and they're another one of those teams. It's kind of the reverse of Hudson. Chippewa gets a couple goals on you, and all of a sudden it's a feeding frenzy. Now the passes it's just tic tac toe, and their confidence goes up. So again, I'd say I don't want to be the cop out media guy, but it really wouldn't surprise me. I think you could make a case for any one of those four teams. I think the seeds are very fair, given what the regular season was when they did the seeding meeting. But I think any of the four could come out, and I would definitely concur that top to bottom, that sectional number one is the toughest in the state.
Yeah, I think Spash's big negative is that they have some bouts of inconsistency. Mm-hmm. They've beaten Wausau West twice. They beat Verona. They beat Eau Claire North. But then they have a loss to Ashwaubenon and a loss to Brookfield. Those are not games you'd expect to lose when you're beating those other teams.
Right, and there's some teams, and I'd throw, North and kind of early season Memorial in that category where there's that loss that's kind of the head scratcher that just doesn't meet. And how, again, in sports, and it's not just hockey, there are just certain teams that just tend to play to the level of their competition. And again, these are 15 to 18-year-old kids, and speaking from personal experience, sometimes there were decisions that I'm sure baffled my coaches, but so be it. But yeah, I think that section is pretty. Again, you'd put Hudson as a favorite just because I think that you just look at their whole body of work. That's the most impressive resume. But Memorial's playing at a high level. Chip was playing at a high level, and Spash. And I think you touched on it, Bill. It's just they play their game, and they're going to be a tough out. So yeah, it'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, and then moving on to the state tournament, you've been the voice of the state tournament for several years now on TV. What's the prep for that like for those of us that aren't professional broadcasters, and how does it differ from, you're doing a game for WMEQ?
Yeah, the prep is pretty similar, and I'm at the point of the season now where having done this for a while, I just use an Excel spreadsheet and put in fact, I could probably pull one out for you. Just put everything in, nice big letters. So, old time broadcaster with aging eyes can actually see what we got going on. And because it's in a spreadsheet form, I can, if there's a line change, if somebody's moving along, it's just a matter of taking this guy out here, this guy there. And then all I have to update each week is records changed and then the stats. And like I said, you guys do a phenomenal job of keeping that up to date. So it's just a way you can just kind of plug that in. It's a little different from the state level, but the WIA is good enough to get line combinations from the teams that make it. So you can, you can do that. And I generally always reach out to the coaches to get just to get something in addition, and then maybe just do a couple questions, some general questions about teams. It's nice because everything's online. You can read newspaper articles. You can watch videos. You can get a sense of who's who. The challenge for hockey, unlike basketball, is one, you've got more guys on the ice at a time than you do in a basketball court. And secondly, they've got helmets on. So, one of the challenges, and I know at state, for various reasons, we're at one end of the ice. And if you've got a team you're not familiar with skating at you and they don't have numbers on their shoulders, it can get kind of tough. Luckily, there's a monitor that has a center ice view, but it gets kind of tough to, look at your screen and then look up on that. So, but again, it's some way we make it work, and it's a fun process. It'll be interesting this year to play at the Southwood County rink as opposed to the, Alliant Energy Center. So that'll be different. And, but I guess much like you guys and all the players and coaches I've talked to since the beginning of this, even the fall season, it's just people are just happy to play, and they'll play wherever and whenever, however it is. And I know from a company standpoint that, Quincy Media and the four, WAOW in Wausau, WQW in Eau Claire, WXOW in La Crosse, and WKOW in Madison. There was a lot of logistical work that went into this year's tournament broadcast because there were some time, first of all, the formats that the WIA had were not written in stone, and they were just trying to figure out what they were going to do. And there was some concern that it just wouldn't fit in the typical time slots, for ABC programming, but they figured out a way to make it happen. And so those of us who are, in charge of doing the broadcasts, Alec Osmus from WKOW is going to help out as always. And he's a Minnesota guy who went to St. Cloud State, so he should know something about hockey. And he's done a nice job the last couple of years. So we'll wait to see exactly who makes it. And then I think it'll dictate which teams or which divisions we cover. And the only suggestion I would make is, if you could avoid doing a back-to-back game for hockey, that's probably better. So my guess is somebody will do Division II and Division I boys, and then somebody else will do the the girls championship in the middle. It just kind of depends which teams make it out of which sectionals.
Bob, quick question. With Live Barn being involved in a majority of the hockey rinks this year, as a broadcaster, are you able to take advantage of that to see things and catch up on the different teams?
Well, interestingly enough, Susan does Live Barn. Like if she can't make it to see her Chippewa or her synchronized skating team, either up at Chippewa or here in Hobbs, she does that. Or if she's not able to watch the grandson play at Squirt A hockey for Black River Falls, and there's someplace, like down at Sauk Prairie, for example, Now, can't drive down there or choose not to. But yeah, so I do that. Sometimes I lean a little bit on just what's out there on YouTube, and sometimes it's, TV station highlights. It's amazing what's out there now. And I think back to when I got into this, 30 some years ago, when you spent a lot of time on the phone getting information, and, hopefully stuff comes through the fax machine, and you just didn't have as much at your fingertips like you do now. It just really changes things. So, it just comes down to, you want to prep to have, and I always look at things and say, you know what, the main thing I've got to do is get my charts. It's kind of like the tests in college where they let you bring it, a little sheet in with notes. That's kind of how I look at the play-by-play sheets. So it's like, yeah, the whole process of retyping things and looking at your charts and getting things organized, that helps remember numbers and names. But once you have it on your chart, then you're pretty good. And then you could spend your time talking to coaches, or I don't know how, obviously they're not going to do it in Wisconsin Rapids, but you guys remember, because I know you guys are always there, that Wednesday before the traditional state hockey tournament is your time to see the teams for 20 minutes. And I always found that really helpful, not only just because you get to interview the coaches, maybe talk to a player or two, is you can start seeing guys, and you can start seeing, I keep thinking, when Eau Claire Memorial played West Salem, and West Salem had Jack Gorniak, and I've certainly heard of him, but I'd, beyond a highlight or two that I maybe caught on somebody else's website, hadn't seen him. So it was really cool to watch him skate up and down the ice. And then you're like, okay, I know what this kid looks like now. I don't have to lean on my chart or see the number. I get to know him. And that's where I was, I was kind of spoiled. The first year I did both the girls and boys games was when Jay Wilson took his first retirement. And so I was doing both the girls and boys game. Well, it just happened to be Eau Claire Memorial's unbeaten season. And having covered those guys all year, I didn't need a chart at all, because I knew just by how they looked on the ice, well, that was Jefferson Dahl, and that was Brady Sand, and that was Brady Keegan, et cetera, et cetera. So the challenge always is, I think, with the teams that you haven't seen, because you don't know the background, you don't know the stories as much, and you certainly don't know the players. So when you're prepping, you tend to study those teams a little bit more.
I will say that following along as I do on Twitter all throughout the tournament, I see comments on Twitter of people like complaining because they'll pull up, a broadcast for the games that aren't on TV. They'll pull up, someone's radio broadcast, and they'll be like, blank is such a homer. Because obviously the radio broadcasters are all there for a specific team.
Exactly.
I've never actually heard that about you covering Eau Claire Memorial at the state tournament. I've never seen someone on Twitter saying Bob is such a homer.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I'm guessing somebody somewhere must have said it to somebody. But again, I was so fortunate in that when I moved across the St. Croix River to go to grad school at UW-Madison, not only got to deal with some just outstanding people in that journalism and mass communication department, but also had the good fortune to wind up at WKOW as I like to tell Jay that I was the oldest living sports intern in WKOW history, and learn just kind of the way to go about your business from Jay Wilson, who's one of the best. But one of the things you learned, and when I was watching the high school tournament broadcast up close for the first time, kind of seeing behind the scenes, understanding why you can't be a homer. Because if you're doing that at the state tournament level, you're going to get some irate people from other markets, as well as irate advertisers. And, it's different than it is at the high school level than it is at the college level. But hey, at some point somebody's got to be paying attention to the money. So you have to learn to kind of play it down the middle so you're not offending anybody. And I don't know, and again, just watching other people that did it that I respected, it's like you get excited for good plays and that sort of thing. And yeah, maybe inside, because these kids, these families, they're in some cases neighbors. there's a little bit of disappointment, but up here you gotta be professional about it. So, but you're right. I mean, when it's local radio, and say for example you're covering a Eau Claire Memorial or an Eau Claire North or a Chippewa at a state tournament, and they're playing somebody like down in the southeast corner of the state, yeah, you can do that. But at the same time, I think it's important. And when I started on the broadcast crew as an announcer, would have been the 96-97 season, Doug Chickering would give his talk before every girls basketball and every boys basketball tournament. And just a reminder, in a gentle but firm way, Doug was an administrator, but just that this is the high school level. These aren't millionaire athletes. They're not, full-time officials. They're, firemen and police officers and accountants and lawyers that are officiating this. And they're all doing it. This is high school sports, and to treat it as such. And I never had a problem with that, because having officiated myself, and Bill Sr., you'll appreciate, I think the only umpire in American Legion history in northern Minnesota to call a swinging strike a ball, but that's a story I'll save for another time. It was women's softball night that night in Chisholm, so we'll just leave that there. You know what I mean? And you guys know this. You've been around sports your entire life. It's really easy to sit up there in row 27 and gripe about officiating or gripe about coaching or any of that kind of stuff. Well, rather than complain about it, why don't you do it? That's not so easy. So
when you mentioned, this is high school sports. We have a rule on Wisconsin Prep Hockey. Generally speaking, if we're writing up a game or we're doing this podcast here, you have to realize that 98% of the players playing are technically children.
Exactly.
So we will not criticize a player by name. We will not say blank made a boneheaded play. We will not criticize a player by name, because they are children.
Exactly. And they're somebody's kids. And I can remember a story that I did, one of the vignettes that we, our whole station group produces to, run during half times or between periods or what have you. And talking to a veteran guy up in the Hayward area, whose name escapes me, but I think he was very close to retiring, and talking to his play-by-play or his color commentator, who was also an administrator, former administrator in the Hayward schools, that just said, he goes, as far as we, do it, yeah, we're from Hayward and we know these people, but you got to remember you're dealing with people's most prized possession, which is their kids. They have names. They have histories, they have parents, and it's like, we've all been there. I booted my share of grounders at Chisholm High School and airmailed throws to first base and struck out and missed shots and missed layups, much to Bob McDonald's chagrin. Bill Sr. knows. I still hear that foot stomp periodically. You know what I mean? It's just sort of like, nobody's perfect. And like I said, it's different at the professional level, because it kind of goes with the territory. If you're criticizing something Bill Belichick did, or being critical of the, commissioner for whatever decision, or what GM didn't sign this player, okay, that's fine. That's kind of, like I said, it goes with the territory. But as far as doing it on air, and we would always have that same thing at our station, just doing the regular 6 and 10 highlights, is just that, hey, it's just, hey, after the show, if we're all just sitting around in the sports office and somebody goes, I just don't understand why they didn't take a timeout. All right, that's just discussing. That's just talking about what you witnessed. But to go on the air and say, oh, so-and-so stepped out of bounds and that bucket shouldn't have counted, it's just like, that's a slippery slope to go down. And to me, it's just not how you do things.
Yeah, we've had to take the, we don't criticize, players by name or pick, and we had to kind of remind people of that when, talking about, this team will never get anywhere because their goaltending is weak. Their goaltender has a name, I mean, it's,
right.
It's one kid, we don't, you're not going to get around our little rule by saying their goaltending is weak, because we all know who it is.
Right. And there's a difference between, saying their goaltending is weak, they're not going to go anyplace, and saying his save percentage is .810. You know what I mean? It's like, stats are stats and are facts. Well, again, it's the difference between facts and opinions. And that's one thing that is nice about sports, that there are stats and there are things that are black and white. And if you're stating facts, you're okay. It's when you start drifting into opinion, and not to pick on radio talk show hosts, but I don't believe we have anyone here that does that. You know, there are people who get paid to stir the pot. And I think some people, you know, that are listeners or viewers tend to confuse the two and think, well, that's, and you guys have seen it, you know, and you know, going back to Twitter, people who rip on Rob Domofsky and people from that have covered the Packers for decades. Well, you didn't ask this tough question. It's like, you know, it's like you're criticizing the wrong people is what's happening. And again, it's just I don't know. It's people.
Yeah, you got to make decisions like, you know, not posting that video of the overtime goal, you know, that Wausau West scored when, you know, somebody was 3 feet offside. You know, we'll just keep that one off.
Yeah, I could cite instances where, you know, there were guys in the department who wanted to say, hey, let's send this in to ESPN for this shot. And I'd be like, nah, not this one. Because it's a controversial topic. And you know what? And as long as we're talking about this, that, and the other, and you guys know, I mean, I've dealt with the people at the WIA for a long time. And if I agreed with every policy decision they've made, no. But knowing them personally and on a professional level, they're good people trying to do the best thing for the kids. And they try to put the student athletes first above everything else. And again, they're lightning rods, much like a superintendent, principal, athletic director, coaches within the community, and get all kinds of criticism, a lot of it unwarranted, because that's the nature of the business. So it's like, again, it's a lot. It's so easy to be a critic sitting on your couch, or like I said, in row 27, or sitting behind your computer. It's a lot different if you're sitting in those meetings trying to figure out what you're going to do, you know, and how do you do something that, you know, stays within your own bylaws, stays within legal ramifications, doesn't put the association into, you know, a position where they're going to be sued, all this kind of stuff. And it's just like you guys said, it's like, and you look at the numbers and it's like, yeah, it's great when some of these kids go on to play at college, but most of them are just going to, their high school career, that's it. You know, and then they move on in life, whether it's to tech school or learning a trade or joining the military or going to college, whatever. It's amazing now that I'm an account executive, whatever the heck that means, with the TV station, you know, and looking at LinkedIn and thinking, you know, back in the day, why on earth are all these high school kids, you know, wanting to connect on LinkedIn? It's like, at most we have one internship every year. I can't give everybody, you know, help out when I can. Well, you look back 5-10 years later and you start looking at what some of these former high school athletes are doing. It's remarkable. You know, a lot of them are either doctors or they're in med school, or they're lawyers that are just, you know, out of law school and starting a practice, or some people are entrepreneurs and just, you know, nurses, teachers, what have you. And it's sort of like, well, it's like those public service announcements that the WIA puts out. You know, that's what you're preparing people for, is you're preparing them for life after high school. And hopefully that, you know, being an athlete and, you know, doing that from the younger ages on, you learn a lot about how to handle different situations that, you know, you're going to have to deal with in life.
Yeah, like, you know, the dumb jock myth persists, but student athletes and other students that participate in extracurriculars, whether it's band or choir or the drama department, those students all have higher achievement levels than the students that don't.
Right. And I'll give you an example. So Saturday night, over at Eau Claire Memorial's gym for Eau Claire North, Eau Claire Memorial boys basketball, and Pat Hammond, longtime Eau Claire North coach, was my color commentator, and it was odd because we're sitting at separate tables 6 feet apart, stretching the cord of the headset about to the max as it would go, broadcasting a game within a pandemic. But in talking to not just the players on the team during the game, when North's best player, Chad Crone, who's the youngest of 3 basketball playing Crone brothers, goes to save a ball. His team is down 20 points. He's still hustling, goes to save a ball, goes careening over the scorer's table and knocks our live radio unit to the floor. He stayed on the air. As he was getting back up, he apologized. He apologized for doing it. I'm like, all right, you're doing what you got to do. And then came out onto the court afterwards in his uniform while half the team is already showered and leaving the gym to talk to Coach Hammond and myself. And then he gets up in a conversation with 2 Memorial kids that have just decided to jump on and do play-by-play on the website or on the web stream because they thought it would be fun. So you got Grant Gerber, who's got a football scholarship to St. Thomas, and Vincent Trapani, who's a pitcher, going to Arkansas. Very good kids, articulate, mature. And we're having so it's like the 5 of us. Here's a North kid talking like he's best buddies with these 2 Memorial kids, and Hammond and myself, who are grizzled veterans, and all just chatting. It's sort of like, if that didn't embody what high school sports is, I don't know what else is there. And it's, again, and that's why, and you guys know we're kind of preaching to the choir here. You guys have devoted a significant part of your lives to be involved with this. And the reason you do it is because, and again, I can look at myself. It's like, what would have happened if I didn't have supervised activity between the hours of 3 and 6 p.m. 9 months of the year? Seriously. Bill, I grew up in Chisholm in the 70s. There were any sort of paths I could have gone down that wouldn't have worked out very well. That was just one of the realities. You're from Superior, there's different paths you can take. And I think you touched on it, Bill Jr. It's like, whatever it is, whether it's drama or forensics or music or anything, volunteering, working, it's like, get involved in something, because even good kids left to their own devices sometimes find trouble, and sometimes trouble finds them.
I mean, you could have gone down the road in Hibbing and become a folk singer.
Well, okay, so you got Hibbing with Kevin McHale, Bob Dylan, Robert Zimmerman, but the real name, and the guy who founded the Greyhound Bus Company. And then Chisholm Counters with Moonlight Graham, Bob McDonald, and 2 consecutive U.S. representatives, John Blotnick and Jim Oberstar. And Bill, that growing up in Superior, the name of the bridge going across from Superior to Hibbing Superior to Duluth on Highway 53, the John Blotnick Bridge.
No, we still call it the High Bridge.
Well, of course. Well, maybe it's just the Chisholm people that do that.
Well, anybody, the Minnesota side calls it the Blotnick Bridge.
Well, exactly.
It was always just the High Bridge. We never felt.
Well, exactly.
The need to call it, no.
You could have said, well, let's see, who is from up that way? Dave Obie or somebody like that, or what have you. But the point being, it's like, well, I think back, I look at my father, who's deceased from a couple of years ago. Bob McDonald was one of the little kids in the neighborhood tagging along after my dad and his group on the south side of Chisholm. Neither McDonald nor my dad spoke English in kindergarten. My dad spoke Serbian because his parents were immigrants. McDonald was essentially an illegitimate kid that was sent back to Chisholm to go work, to go live with his grandparents. They spoke Croatian. I guess they figured it out. They survived. And you could certainly argue that they thrive, but, and yeah, there are days I get, frustrated with my lot in life, and something is, it's a headache or something like that. And I just kind of stop and think, hey, I was, out of college trying to figure out how I'm going to entertain myself, which, living in the Twin Cities going, should we go here? Should we go here? Should we listen to this band? My dad was jumping out of an airplane. So it's like, and I'm sure every one of you guys could look at your ancestors and say, hey, they kind of paved the way for us. So off we go. Guys, we've solved all sorts of life's problems here in the span
Yes,
of
we
what?
have.
40 minutes? So yeah.
All right.
I'm not even on a soapbox. So,
Well, unless anybody has anything else for Bob, I think we can let him go.
should we talk Division Two? I'll say Rice Lake, I think looks awfully good. And I tell you what, Josh Engel, another 06 Badger, back in his hometown coaching. I'm hearing that the numbers at the youth levels are starting to ramp back up again. So
That's good because Rice Lake is one of the smaller schools in the Big Rivers.
right, smaller schools in the Big Rivers, but one of the bigger schools in Division Two. So you can look at them in Superior and go, well, you can, again, there's some other good teams there. And then there's that other sectional up around these parts that I think is kind of is pretty wide open. And even a team like Menominee that has taken a beating in the BRC, they've got some kids. I mean, obviously they went to a sectional final last year. And then the same on the girls' side. That they're, again, splitting that sectional where you got Hudson, the Fusion, and the Western Wisconsin Stars in one sectional, and then the ECA Stars in another one. I think, again, it wouldn't surprise me if two teams from the BRC made it through. So, but there again, it's fun, and this is the really fun part of year. And again, it's not going to be the same as it was in past years, as far as crowds and all that sort of thing. But as far as the action on the ice, and I can ask you guys this too, as far as the action on the ice, I haven't seen any drop off.
No.
What I notice is that, you don't get the roar of the crowd. You don't get all this other stuff. But again, for you three guys, have you noticed any drop off in the level of play?
No, and I haven't watched any games in person. I've watched many games over the internet. I watched Friday's Janesville USM game. Wasn't the best game,
Right.
but they were all still going at it. But like the thing that caught me is like right away, I think it was the first game I watched the season way back in December. It was at a rink that did not allow fans at all. And still, players scored a goal, went over to the corner, jumped up against the glass, cheered to the non-existent crowd. And I'm like, yeah, they're still playing hockey. They don't care.
Exactly. Well, I'll be looking for that in Hudson in that corner where they always have that little red target, and it's the Selly button where the Hudson guys go and jump on. So, yeah, we'll see that. And then a quick question for you guys. Again, Division One. What other programs are you looking at coming out of those other three sectionals?
I think we all pretty much agreed on Notre Dame in Section 2, USM in Section 4, and then on Section 3, I think we were split.
I think each one of us picked a different one.
I think Dell took Edgewood, I took Verona, and Burglar took Sauk Prairie.
Okay.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
So I took Verona because it seems like it's always Verona. It doesn't seem to matter how the season goes or what happens. Verona seems to come out of there, and they won it last year and returned a lot of those players. So.
Right. And Joe Marshall's, again, another one of those good coaches, consistency in the coaching staff, good feeder programs where everybody's on the same page. And they're that program that just seems to get better as the season goes on. So, yeah. I've heard good things about Sauk from some people up around here that they're legit. And it'll be interesting. And again, in Division 2, I mean, you're looking at Pines and Springs. And Springs is absolutely loaded, as you guys know. They've got some good.
They returned their whole state tournament roster.
Yeah. Boy, and that was.
When you look at Edgewood, one of the things that I'm going to wonder about coming into game this week is, they now haven't played for over a week. Considering they ended up winning their thing by forfeit on this week on Thursday, Friday game, and so they haven't played this last week at all. And so is that whole week off going to hurt at all?
Yeah.
Don't be so quick to pick Pines in Section 2. I mean, they had 12 seniors last year.
That they did.
And I mean, they somehow they got the number 1 seed, but Rhinelander just won their Great Northern Conference is pretty much the same as their sectional.
Mm-hmm.
And Rhinelander just won. Rhinelander's beaten Pines both times they played them this year.
Right.
Mosinee and Lakeland. I mean, we had Lakeland rated very high until they kind of had some bad games the last couple of games. They've got a very talented team, but tend to have some ill-advised penalties. They lost their game to Mosinee in the conference tournament 3-2, and Mosinee, all 3 of their goals were on power play goals.
Mm-hmm.
From ill-advised penalties.
Right.
So it could be the 4 teams that are left in that section right now. You could make a case for any one of them.
Yeah. Right. And I'm glad you pointed it out. There's something about that Pines tradition, and it's just, there's so many. When you look at some of the coaches, both at the varsity level and in the youth programs, it's just like another one of those teams that somehow figures it out even when they're not at their most talented. But yeah, and the same thing. By the same token, I know in talking with Coach Engel about what else is going on around the state, and he talked about Rhinelander as a program that has had some success at the lower levels, and now these kids are in the varsity. So yeah, it's all good stuff, and it's just, again, it's a fun time of year. It's odd to not have the state tournament in March, but if there's anything that this pandemic has told us is that schedules aren't written in stone, and the best thing is to be flexible, and maybe who knows, 20, 30 years from now, all the athletes at the high school level can look back on things and say, hey, we made it through that.
Have you been to Eagle River?
Yes. In fact, last year we went to go watch some of these Black River kids play in that 3-on-3 tournament. And
so you saw that after the remodel, so they have like regular size ice now.
It was actually now that I think about it, it was two winters ago. So it was pre-remodel, and they were actually raising money, and I think I threw a little something into the kitty just because it's like, I think those kids know how special that place is and how much history there is. And then I could have spent a half a day just walking through that Hall of Fame that they had out there in the lobby, and just realizing it's like, well, I remember this guy, and I remember hearing about this coach, and seeing Vic Levine, with his display there, and geez, I've known Vic and started covering Vic when I was in Madison in the early 90s, and he's been a color commentator and a stats guy, and just a wealth of information. So
if you look at they have pictures of some of their old men's teams from the Great Lakes hockey season or hockey league, the men's team up there, and they've got pictures from like the 40s and 50s of these teams, and you look at the names on the bottom, and the last names are all the same as the kids that are playing now.
Exactly.
They're like 4th generation hockey players.
Yeah, and it's again, there's the Sneddons, and there's again, you just
the Sneddons, the Millettes,
right? Yeah, and that is, again, to be able to keep that kind of tradition going, and and you throw some of the suitors up there, and I'm like, well, obviously it's a beautiful place to live if you like hunting and fishing and just being in the outdoors and kind of being away from the hustle and bustle of Wausau. if that's what you want, it's sort of like, boy, that's paradise. And it's just like good for them. And and you guys know this, and one of the things is Susan's son, the dog is getting really antsy now. One of the things he's learning is that everybody's always willing to help. Okay, maybe not your arch rival is gonna come and help with you, but you can look. Heck, I mean, all these off-season clinics and stuff that people do, everybody wants to help everybody else because it's all about growing the sport. And again, to bring it back full circle to you guys, it's like, what you're doing with the Prep Hockey website, it's just raising the visibility of these sports. And my philosophy in covering local sports was always, it's like, hey, yeah, sure, of course we're going to cover the Green Bay Packers because they're the Packers, But at the same time, it's like we can certainly elevate these high school teams to a point where it becomes something special. Maybe that keeps more kids involved in the program, and we used to get that all the time, and I'm sure the guys are still getting that now, but why aren't you covering the JV teams, or why aren't you covering this? And my response was always like, well, we've got these many teams in the backyard, and then we've got these many teams in the viewing area. We're covering everything. We're covering girls tennis and the soccers and everything, and the swimming and up and down, and we try to give it all the same effort, but you prioritize based on what you perceive the interest is. It's like that alone keeps us more than busy. And if we're going to start having to cover JV teams or youth teams, it's like there's that. And then the other half of that is, well, why not have, give those kids some incentive to stick with the program and get to the high school level, as opposed to saying, we won the Squirt A tournament, and then that's the highlight of your athletic career. Well, that's I don't think that's what anybody is looking for. It's all for to kind of prepare you for what's next.
So, Bob, on the girls' side up there, have you had a chance to see any of their games? Or
I haven't, Dell, and again, it's just because of cancellations and postponements and all that sort of thing. But I have followed along as best I can, and I think in terms of sectionals, I think the ECA Stars have a pretty good draw, and they did get the 1 seed in that section.
in Section 3.
Yeah, and the other section, the Section 1, with the likes of the Western Wisconsin Stars, the Somerset Co-op, Hudson, and Chippewa Falls got in there. That to me has got, the section that, again, kind of a coin flip. You can make the case, the Western Wisconsin Stars had the best season, but, Matt Cranston with the Fusion, he knows a lot. And he knows how to get a team ready for the postseason. And Hudson always has talent, and they're well. They get Karen Bai on the staff. She won an Olympic gold medal. Same thing. I think the kids are listening to her. I'm still wondering how the River Falls people feel about Karen going 7 miles up the road. You know what I mean? But it's like, again, there's good hockey up around those parts. And that's one of those sections that you kind of make a case for any one of those. But I guess just in general, Dell, I mean, having been the first broadcaster ever for, let's see, Jim Thies's Hudson teams won the first 2 girls hockey championships ever. And just the leaps and bounds that sport has grown. I mean, quite frankly, those first teams were kind of like the amoeba going up and down the ice. Whereas now it's like they're running power plays, they're doing breakouts, they're doing everything the boys are doing. Are they as fast as skaters? Generally not. Are the shots as hard? No. But it's a good quality of hockey. And then I think when you start looking at, well, teams like UW Eau Claire women, other strong, the Badgers women's teams, and you start seeing the number of kids that are coming out of Wisconsin schools, I think it speaks well to where the sport is. And hopefully someday there'll be a state tournament venue that I think is fitting for just the quality of high school hockey in Wisconsin. I mean, it's never going to be Minnesota, and not in our lifetimes anyway. But at the same time, it's just think it would be really nice if people could realize just how good the hockey is on this side of the St. Croix River and north of Illinois and all that kind of thing. So. And I don't have to tell you guys that. I mean, the state's produced some awfully good players, not in the same volume as the Minnesotas or the Massachusetts, but really good players that have made their mark on, other levels. So who knows? Maybe someday. Is this the first time you guys have ever had a dog on your webcast? Is that?
I think we've heard a dog a couple times. I don't know that we've seen one.
We get that in our meetings, at our virtual meetings at work. Our sales manager's got a dog, or she's got 3 dogs, and invariably every meeting she's yelling at one of them, or they're barking, or that sort of thing. So,
And you mentioned earlier, you don't know what account executive is supposed to mean. I think that means you're supposed to make them money.
Yeah, there's that. And oftentimes on these sales calls, we do get to that. there's conversations about sports and, but again, it's such a great opener. And again, you go around town, and how many business owners, I don't want to waste your time by digging through it. I was calling on one of my accounts, local realtor. Well, I'll say the name, Ned Donlin. His son David was a defenseman on that '08 Old Abe's team. Well, Ned, the dad, played for Dick Bennett at Eau Claire Memorial, and gave me, actually had his receptionist photocopy a 45-page, let's see if someplace in this mess, a 45-page booklet that Dick Bennett gave to every single kid in the Eau Claire Memorial program. It's just amazing. It's coaching gold. It's something that any coach in any sport could use, because it's all about fundamentals and the mental preparation. And surprise, surprise, Dick talked about defense being the key. But, and it's just amazing. When you start thinking of coaches having an impact on people, and it's not just about sports, it's about life and teaching those lessons and that sort of thing. So it's, it's just kind of amazing sometimes when you start looking at people who, businesses that support high school sports, well, they've been involved with it. Their dad's, Ned's dad, who has earned a Bronze Star and, fighting in France, joined the military after 3 years of lettering for the Badgers football team in the early 40s. So you're looking at multiple generations of kids. I got the biggest kick out of Ty Emberson scoring a pair of goals against the Gophers. His grandfather played for the Gophers football team back in the day. And here on a basketball broadcast, I'm looking through Twitter and I'm like, hey, Pat, guess what? Badgers beat the Gophers. Here's Pat, who you could probably count the number of hockey games that he's gone to on one hand, excited about it, and excited that Ty Emberson scored a pair of goals, then talks about how well Sam Stang is playing. And the first retweet of the fact that grizzled veteran broadcasters are calling this game Hudson hockey. So, again, Jim Nantz and Tony Romo, they can have their Super Bowl. I don't even know how it turned out, but this is more fun for me anyway.
I say, yeah, that you mentioned it, the Badgers had a very nice weekend in the border battle.
Darn good, yeah. Boy, that doesn't happen very often. I mean, they've won games up there before, but, a lot of times it's the split. Like, somebody will get the other one on a Friday, and then the other team will kind of rise up and get it back. So that's, and again, good for that group. And, knowing some of those kids between, and again, not that I'm partial, but I've just gotten to know those kids, Sam Stang and Ty Emberson, and interviewed them countless times. They're better people than they are hockey players. And they've both been drafted by NHL teams, if that tells you anything. Just respectful, funny, just, personable, good families, down to earth. You would never know that they were big time athletes and pro prospects. You'd never know. And
we like to hear that too, because like Sam Stang won our forward, our Joe Pavelski award a couple of years ago. Right. And, we don't like, someone wins those awards, then a couple of years later we find out they're just a dick. We don't like that.
Well, he also was a pretty darn good baseball player. That showed up in one of the broadcasts, and Bill Brophy was very excited because it was Brof and Bob Brainerd on the call. When, here's North down to a final strike in the bottom of the sixth, losing to Sun Prairie, and what does Sam do? Oh, I'm just going to hit a bomb out to right field and essentially win the game with the 3-run homer and be state player of the year for baseball on top of hockey. He's just a good kid, and credit to the family, credit to the school district, and you could make that. I remember one of those Big Ten hockey media days, the first one. I must have talked to Nate Condon from Wausau West for 10 minutes, and nothing about Gophers or Badgers, but it was all about Pete Susans and this player and that player, and which one of his teammates was at Eau Claire, and how he, again, it's hockey. Everybody knows everybody at some level. So to me, that's the cool part about it. And getting to know these really high-end players as people, and again, go down the list of guys that, the Jake Dowells, the Davis Struiskis, the Josh Engels, they're just good human beings. And, each one of those guys has had to go through any number of life challenges, but, here they are doing, giving back to the sport. And that's just cool to see.
All right. Anything else, gentlemen? Dell says no.
I think we have a quorum.
Well, all right.
I didn't even get to the David Kakowski era of Superior High School hockey, because David is yet another one of those South Side Chisholm guys, and lived a couple blocks up the street. I didn't know him as well because he didn't play basketball or baseball, and he wasn't in the band. So that, but obviously, he stepped into a good situation. But I mean, just from afar, following when I was working in another state, it was kind of like, hey, look at that Chisholm guy. They won some state titles, so good. Good for him.
You're thinking of wrapping up then, Bill? Because before you do, I just wanted to get back to more of a somber note. The Wisconsin hockey community lost another family member last week. Julie Langseth, the wife of Todd Langseth, who was longtime assistant coach for Anago under Bill Thorson, and then head coach himself, took the 2005 team down to the state tournament. Also athletic director at Anago High School for a long time. Julie lost her battle with cancer last week. They had, Connor and Eric both played, hockey for Anago High School. So that, it's always bad when, she was too young, and a sad note, but the hockey community, I mean, everybody knows everybody else. So I'm sure. Well, and she was legendary gymnastics coach,
right?
In Anago.
Remember the name,
took the gymnastics team down the state. It seemed like they were down the state tournament every year.
Right.
But tremendous person, tremendous family, a big loss for Anago, and as for the hockey community overall. I think most of the people know Todd.
Yeah.
The hockey people do.
He's the most terrifying person I've ever met.
Well, and then to bring it back full circle to the state tournament broadcast, I mean, Rob Andringa, had come from, I think he had chemo that week, and when I saw him downstairs, down below at the Coliseum, you could tell that he was still hurting. And I just he had popped in late, and I was meeting with some other folks about the broadcast, and I just came around and said, hey, Rob, how are you doing? Boy, the smile lit up, and just excited, and had all these questions. It was just like, same thing. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, what the heck do I have to complain about? This guy drove from the Twin Cities to do a high school hockey game in Wisconsin after going through chemo and knowing that the prognosis was not good. And he stepped into that role after Jeff Sauer's untimely passing. And again, that was such a thrill to even be in the same broadcast as those guys, let alone stand next to them and talk to hockey, because when I was a younger guy and living in St. Paul, I remember watching the Badgers win the, what do they call it? The frozen, not the Final Five, the old WCHA at the old St. Paul Civic Center. Because I could walk downtown from
Final Five.
Grand Avenue and watching them and seeing Jeff Sauer coach the team behind the bench and seeing Rob Andringa. And it was one of those great moments where the Gophers had been knocked out in the semifinals. So, of course, there's all kinds of tickets for sale and all kinds of empty seats. And you could show up in the middle of the second period, just wander in. And, of course, there was the Wisconsin band and a real hearty group of souls who, after the game, marched with the band down to Tom Reed's place, a couple blocks away. There's only Wisconsin fans and the band can do, but to go from that and going, wow, this is really the big time. This is, boy, there's Jeff Sauer sitting behind the bench, and here's all these guys, to years later. And it's just like, wow, that's not bad, So I've been very fortunate in that regard to, be sitting next to people or standing next to people like that for hockey, or sitting next to a Jerry Pettigrew at basketball. And, for that matter, sitting next to a Pat Hammond, who is a nonstop source of entertainment, and Bill, where his second coaching stop was in basketball. Anago.
Oh, yes.
Edgar number 1, Anago number 2, and then Eau Claire North number 3. So, one of those people, we used to always joke at the basketball broadcast, 6 degrees of Pat Hammond. You could take any two people in that arena at random, and you could connect them through Hammond. But again, I think we could all say we're veterans of the media, such as it is, but, that's the best part of sports, is just the relationships and the people you get to know along the way. It's just, there's no downside to that, I'll tell you that.
All right, so now we done?
Yep.
All right.
All right. Thank you for listening, hockey fans. We'll be back. I'm not sure if we're going to be back on Sunday or Monday next week. That'll be determined, but we will return with basically state tournament preview next week. Thank you for listening to This Week in Wisconsin Prep Hockey.